For 16 consecutive days now, fuel prices are rising. Petrol prices across the 4 metros have increased by more than 3 rupees per litre in this time. And so today, on this very day, petrol and diesel prices have actually touched their highest ever mark in all 4 metros. And did you know that nearly 50% of the price that we pay for petrol is actually just tax? Oil Minister Dharmendra Pradhan has acknowledged that taxes are one of the main factors behind high fuel prices. But what exactly is the government doing to change that? Well, nothing much actually. The money generated from these taxes for the centre alone will come to some 3.5 lakh crores this year. That's just from petrol taxes. So now we know why they don't want to give that up so easily. But the same leaders who attacked the UPA for high fuel prices when in opposition are defending that hike today. And suffering in the process is the common man. Here is how this hike is really affecting people.
Every afternoon, Ashok Kumar makes the trip from the Okhla Mandi to UP to buy produce, returning with the goods at night. He's paid the same amount for every trip, but thanks to the diesel his truck is guzzling, his expenses have spiked.
बहुत बुरा असर आया, काम सारा ठप हो चुका है। भाड़े हमारे जो 1 साल पहले थे, आज भी भाड़े वही हैं और डीजल के दाम बढ़ते जा रहे हैं।
Big businesses can bear the cost of short-term fuel hikes, but smaller operations are already beginning to suffer. This protest in Sarmala in Punjab saw farmers handing over their tractors saying they can't run them anymore as the cost of diesel was prohibitive now. Luckily for Arshad, his fruit supplier uses a CNG auto to bring him produce. But that doesn't mean the spike does not affect him.
मेरा अप डाउन करने में दिक्कत आती है, घर से जाता हूँ तो बाइक से, तो पेट्रोल में खर्चा आया है मेरा। पहले जैसे मेरे 3000 लगते थे उधर अब मेरे 4000 रुपए लगते हैं।
And some businesses are already bearing the brunt. Gurnam Singh is spending more but unwilling to raise the price of his rolls just yet.
चिकन है उसमें हमारा 20 रुपए किलो के हिसाब से रेट बढ़ गया है। जो हमारे सप्लाई देता है उसने 20 रुपए रेट बढ़ा दिए है। जो कॉस्टिंग है हमारी बढ़ जाती है। 20 रुपए किलो के हिसाब से हम जो सारा दिन में जो अपना रोल बना के बेचते हैं उस पर तकरीबन 150 रुपया पर डे का हमें एक्स्ट्रा पे करना पड़ता है चिकन के रूप में।
With businesses and small shopkeepers unable to pass on the costs to unwilling customers, they have no option but to bear the burden of the fuel price hike. In New Delhi, this is Nimsha Jaswal for NDTV.
And I spoke earlier this evening to Rajiv Kumar, the Vice Chairman of the Niti Aayog, for more on this big story. Mr. Kumar, we're seeing these fuel prices now rising for 16 consecutive days, and the rise has actually been pretty steep. Now, you have called for state and central taxes to be cut, but why do you think it's taking so long for the government to react to give this relief?
No, this is a very, very major decision, which has all sorts of macroeconomic implications. It impacts the fiscal situation of the government. It also impacts, the sort of balance sheets of the major oil companies. Plus, you have to coordinate this with the centre and the states because just taking one-sided action will not help. So so this is. I don't think it's too long. The government, the issue is under active consideration of the government, and I hope a decision will be taken soon.
But do you believe that the only way to really bring prices down is for the government to cut this excise duty, to cut these taxes?
Well, as I have said in the past, I think the states are much better placed to take that step because they impose an ad valorem tax, which I think is on average 27% at the moment, and therefore with the increase in rise in prices, their revenues continue to go up, so they get a windfall gain, which is not like what the centre get, because the centre duties, centre taxes are in specific terms. So I think the best placed entities at the moment are the state governments, which should bring down this tax on the petroleum as soon as possible. And I think also that if the centre government feels that there is fiscal space, which is important, because we do not want to get into a fiscal imbalance here, because that has all sorts of ramifications. But if we can make the fiscal space, then yes, I have said in public before, the central government should reduce the excise duties on petroleum, because we do not want inflationary expectations to get entrenched in the economy.
Well, the oil minister had actually said a few days ago that bringing petrol and diesel under GST would be considered. And again, you have said that this is prudent and this would actually bring down prices sharply, wouldn't it?
Well, it depends upon what the GST rate is decided for the petroleum products. But if it does come in at the highest rate even, which is 28%, it will bring down the prices. But then the states may not agree to that because that will reduce their revenues quite sharply. So one has to wait and see what the GST Council does. And given the rather substantial dependence on these revenues of a large number of states, there is some resistance to it. But I hope the states will realize that it is much better for the economy and for our businesses to have petroleum and electricity under the GST, maybe even at a higher rate if so required for revenue reasons.
Well, finally, Mr. Kumar, the government's main concern seems to be the money it would lose out if it cuts these taxes. Now, is that a legitimate worry? Does the government not have any other sources of revenue now so that at least this pressure on oil prices is eased?
No, that is the critical question that the government is faced with. 1 rupee cut in excise duties on petroleum products implies a revenue loss of up to between 13,000 and 14,000 crore. Now that's not insignificant. Therefore, therefore the government must look at how the revenues are shaping up. If there is the required buoyancy in both direct taxes and indirect taxes, and also if non-tax revenues through disinvestment can be higher than what they are already budgeted for. And I think this is what this is perhaps the exercise that is now underway in the Ministry of Finance, because they must be looking at all these numbers. So to do this in a manner that you bring relief to the consumers, you stop inflation from rising, and yet at the same time maintain fiscal balance, I think is a complex exercise. But as I said, in my own view, there is a buoyancy in the tax revenues, and therefore I think there would be fiscal space. How much there is of course a matter of detail, and that will what is determined whether the government is able to take this step or not.
Well, Mr. Kumar, thank you for speaking to NDTV this evening. Rajiv Kumar, the Vice Chairman of the Niti Aayog, saying he does believe there is room to bring down these taxes on fuel, which could in turn then of course bring down the prices of fuel. Well, joining us tonight, we have Sajid Chinoy, economist, a well-known economist and member of the Finance Commission's expert panel. Gurcharan Das, author and columnist, is joining us from London via Skype this evening. Jagdish Shettigar, former economic advisor to Prime Minister Vajpayee, here in the studio with us. Mohan Guruswamy, the chairman of the Centre for Policy Alternative Society, and Pawan Khera, the spokesperson of the Congress party, is with us as well. Sajid Chinoy, to you first. Do you believe there is room to cut these taxes and to ease the burden that ordinary folks are facing on fuel prices today?
I think it's a very delicate balancing act, Nidhi. I think to start with, we have to acknowledge that what we're seeing in India is just a reflection of what's happening globally. That crude prices have gone up, 40 to 50% over the last 7 months. Now, this is an adverse terms of trade shock, which means some part of the Indian economy will have to bear this cost. So the question is, if taxes were to be cut, that is going to put some fiscal pressure. Now, two things can stem from that. One is the government will have to cut other expenditures to meet its fiscal deficit, and that could either mean some rural development program or public investment. At this point, both of which would be undesirable. And on the other hand, if those expenditures are not cut, then the fiscal deficit would widen, and that also has unintended consequences. It pushes up the cost of borrowing for the private sector. And I think most of all, in a very turbulent global environment in the last 4 to 6 weeks, I think it's very important for all emerging markets to give the impression that they're being fiscally responsible. So there's no free lunch here. Some cost will have to be borne by somebody. Personally, if you look at the last year, what we've seen is urban consumption growth has been quite strong. The rural economy is struggling and investment is struggling, both private investment and public investment. So as uncomfortable as it may be, I think the government's doing the right thing, that if anybody has to bear this cost for now, it should be urban consumers. we should not be cutting investment, and we should not be cutting expenditure to the rural economy.
The problem is here.
From now, I think at that point,
I understand what you're saying, but the problem here, Gurcharan Das, is two things. One, even when crude oil prices were actually lower, it's not that Indian consumers benefited from that. Right now they are going on the higher side. They've come down a bit. I think they've risen a bit in the last hour or so. But Indian consumers did not benefit from lower crude prices. Secondly, when it has been convenient, the fuel prices have not been raised, as they were not during the time that the Karnataka campaign was underway. And once that election ended, we suddenly saw this steep increase in fuel prices every single day. And today is the 16th day of that happening. So when you want to, you can hold it back and ensure that there is no hike and use it at your convenience. You can't have it both ways. Mr. Das.
Yeah, I agree with you. And that's what politics is all about. Unfortunately, there is often a contradiction between economics and politics. But the worst thing we can do is to try and do what we did before the liberalization of oil prices. Fortunately, the first liberalization came with the UPA 2 on the petrol prices when Mr. Chidambaram was the finance minister, and the second liberalization came when the NDA, when they liberalized. They liberalized diesel. These were very hard fought victories. And so it would be very wrong to just say, okay, tomorrow oil companies lower the prices and go to hell, which is what we were doing for years and years. Now at least we are realizing that half the price we pay is taxes, and that is the right place to go. The fact is that there are two factors here. One is some prices should go up with the market because it makes consumers aware and they are not profligate with the use of their vehicles. And it's hard to identify this, but that is what happens in the rest of the world, where market prices determine the course of how you behave. But at the same time, India is a poor country, and I would certainly say that the right course is to cut taxes, and the right course is to find money, whether through disinvestment or whatever, find money to balance the budget and not hurt the fiscally prudent path that we have been following. And eventually, I think we should put oil, diesel, the whole thing under GST. They've already said that the aviation fuel and LPG, they're considering putting under GST. That would be the right way to do it. And and I think the easy answer.
But as you acknowledge, you need to cut the taxes.
I'm frankly very upset that Mr. Chidambaram can make a proposal which is so anti-reform, and this is how a lot of the past was always done.
Let me take that to Pawan Khera.
To help.
Is the Congress trying to take us backwards? Okay, let me ask Pawan about that. Gurcharan Das's criticism.
There is no question of Congress taking anybody backward. The Congress is just voicing the angst of the consumer. Consumer is not interested whether the state goes through a so-called fiscal imbalance or the center goes through a so-called fiscal imbalance. The consumer is aware that on petrol, there were 11 hikes on central excise, 211% on petrol and 443% on diesel in the last 4 years. The government has made, oil companies have made almost 10 lakh crores. So the consumer is upset about that. Who's interested in who bears the brunt, whether the center or the state? No, you can't keep passing the buck. Let the states go through, as Mr. Rajiv Kumar was just saying, let the states go through the fiscal imbalance. Center cannot go through. No, where is the money? Where is the money going? You say infrastructure. There is the lowest investment in infrastructure in the last 4 years. The stall projects are the highest in the last 17 years under this government. Where is the money going? Where is the money going? So people are interested in that. People are interested in who's putting who backward, who's trying to talk regressive. Nobody is talking regressive. We are just talking pro-consumer. Is that really wrong?
No, but the criticism is that earlier you had governments interfering with the prices of oil, and now you're letting the market dictate the terms, and that is how ideally it should be. However, I don't think that the government is completely exited, as Karnataka clearly showed.
Absolutely. When Amit Shah, who has technically speaking no role to play in governance, comes and boasts that no, very soon we'll reduce the prices, what does he mean? And fair enough, let market control the prices. What about the central excise? Our focus has to be, when we debate petrol, and it is a GDP crisis, gas, diesel and petrol crisis facing this country. When we are talking about the so-called GDP crisis, let's focus our attention on central excise first, and let's talk about GST later, because that requires a lot of state inputs. We need to bring every state on the same page. That is a time-consuming exercise. We all realize that. What about central excise? That's a simple, fundamental question.
Mr. Shettigar, what would you, if you had to advise the government today on this, what advice would you give them? I mean, this is a politically very sensitive issue. It's also an economically sensitive one.
Politically sensitive, and economically also it will have the widespread effect. So not only the inflationary, and because even through the different industry, and the industry is directly using the petroleum products as the inputs as well as the transportation cost, it will have the widespread effect. Now the factors affecting the rise in the prices, there are two. One, of course, the international factors which no government has got the control, whether it is the OPEC's attitude or even the apprehension about the likely war. So that is a major reason right now. Besides that, the depreciation in the rupee as compared to the January when it was 63 rupees per dollar, till yesterday it was 68, and today of course the rupee got a bit strengthened, that is 67.88. So there are two blows on resulting in the imported price going up. Now as far as the solution is concerned, I mean, mere cut in the taxes is not a long-term solution, because even if you cut the excess, still with the rise in the prices, the tax collection will go up, especially of the states, since the VAT is on the ad valorem basis. So ideally, in the immediate future, we should bring the taxes as a specific, especially the VAT, because as far as the excise duty is concerned, that remains the same, because now that the excise duty is collected on the specific basis, not on the ad valorem basis. But in the long term, this should be brought within the GST net, even if the GST rate is at the maximum, which should not be. It cannot be the maximum. Even if it is 28%, my estimation is that under the present price, the consumer will have to pay below 50 rupees. So ideally, we should bring the GST net, and since in the GST Council, the decisions are taken on the consensus basis, this should be discussed, and the states should agree. And of course, probably the states will also have to agree to bring the liquor and the tobacco into the GST net.
On the issue of the GST, I think that's something that generally everyone agrees on, because it would dramatically bring prices down. Mohan Guruswamy, the problem here also though is the political hypocrisy that is attached to this entire debate on the fuel hike. And that is a problem, because it's very easy for us to sit here and say that, oh, it doesn't matter what somebody said when they were in the opposition, you know, when you're in power, it's a different thing. We don't seem to care anymore on what our politicians have said in the past and hold them accountable to that. I mean, look at what, for instance, Smriti Irani said in a 2011 tweet, calling it the arrogance of power of the UPA because there was a hike in petrol prices. Sushma Swaraj said it was an insensitive government that had hiked petrol prices. The Prime Minister, that time the Gujarat Chief Minister, talked about the burden on hundreds of crores of hundreds of crores on Gujarat. Today, the roles have completely reversed. So, you know, how do we sort of deal with this issue in a non-partisan way, which unfortunately is not happening?
Well, the hypocrisy should not be allowed to go by. The sheer hypocrisy. I heard Prime Minister Modi today say that, you know, at the time petrol was ruling at 104 rupees, international oil prices were $104 a barrel, that he would reduce the price of petrol. that he would actually reduce. When he became Prime Minister, in the first year, oil prices came down to $43 a barrel. He didn't do anything about it.
Exactly.
And the tax on diesel increased from 9.48 rupees per litre to 21.48 rupees a litre. Petrol from 3.58 rupees a litre to 17.33 rupees a litre. At this time, the price of oil was dropping, and even now it is $68 a barrel. So they have no experience. So they collected more revenues. The government last year collected 3.38 lakh crores from petroleum taxes. Where has this money gone? And they have used it to show that current account deficit has come down. They have not changed any taxation. The amount of spending in rural areas has remained the same. Capital expenditure as a percentage is coming down. So, they have just frittered away a good chance, a good money, and they should not be allowed to get away with it. Because the conditions were there for lower prices, provided you held all other prices. Plus, you held all other expenses. They didn't. All these first 2 years, the Prime Minister went from country to country signing arms deals. And has anything changed? Has the security situation improved?
Well, let me take the couple of points that you raised to Sajid Chinoy.
To account for this, any government has to be made to account to this.
Yeah, and I think it's time to call out the political hypocrisy on this, Sajid Chinoy. It's very important for all of us to call out the political across the spectrum. I mean, today even when Mr. Chidambaram tweets about high fuel prices, one has to remind him of what the situation was when his government was in power as well. But, on this issue of when crude prices were actually lower, and Mohan Guruswamy pointed that out as well, I was asking the same thing. It's not like Indian consumers benefited from that decision. And also, how do we know where this money is going? How are we making the government accountable for this money that's being collected through these taxes, which are absurdly high, actually?
Yeah. Nidhi, a couple of things. You're right that on the way down, the burden sharing was much more proportionate. We've looked at the numbers closely. What you saw was half the benefit went to consumers. At that point in time, retail prices came down around 15 rupees a litre, and about half the benefit went to the public sector because excise duties went up almost in tandem. Now the question is, what did the government do with that money? That was about 1% of GDP in 2014-15. Well, money is fungible, but what actually happened? You had the 14th Finance Commission, which ate up about 0.3, 0.4%. We had the Pay Commission the next year, that increased expenditure. We had a shortfall in taxes and disinvestment. So, this was used to fill those gaps. Now, in retrospect, yes, maybe we should have set up an oil fund, and maybe that money should have been saved and not spent, so that we could have dipped into those resources now, but that's being wise in hindsight. I think the question we have to ask ourselves is, there is one fundamental principle we must not forego, which is market prices must at some point reflect international prices, because that affects consumer behavior. That has an automatic stabilizing effect in terms of how much we consume, and that reduces pressure on the current account deficit. The rest really is a political trade-off. How much of this do we want urban consumers to bear, and how much of this should go towards rural spending or infrastructure? And that's really a political call that the government of the day has to make.
Mohan Guruswamy, do you think it's going to actually get worse if we see crude oil prices going up again?
It's going to get worse. It's going to get horrible. I can't contemplate it, because they can't afford to cut any taxes. They're like a drug addict, got used to high taxes. And, they committed the money, and in a year they can't do anything. This is a long drawn out process. The chance you could have held your taxes at the time when prices were coming down. You didn't. You let them go up, and you made commitments for other expenditures. And didn't you know that the Pay Commission was coming, even when you were in the opposition? Don't they read papers? Don't they make calculations when they make announcements like this, that we'll reduce the price of petrol? I mean, this irresponsibility in politics, particularly by the Prime Minister, who made it a big issue. And I've heard about half a dozen videos today where before the elections, he said, I'll reduce the prices. How can you make such statements? How can you be so absurd? And Rajiv Kumar today comes and says, the states must reduce. Maharashtra charges 48 rupees per litre of petrol as VAT. If Maharashtra doesn't charge that, they'll also go broke. And their increase has gone hand in hand with central government increase. If you look at it on all India average, it by and large kept track with that. So the problem is that the taxes are not fixed taxes. They ad valorem taxes. When price of petrol goes up, diesel goes up, taxes also go up. So, you know, these people have been irresponsible. They played ducks and drakes with us. They've taken us for a ride, and they should be made to account for it.
Mr. Shettigar, do you want to take that on? That were the people of India misled that fuel prices would actually come down?
I would say that misled. Certain things are very difficult to communicate also. For instance, the impact
Not
of
for
the
Mr. Modi, he's a very good communicator.
But how can you explain the impact of the depreciation of the rupee? That too because of the withdrawal trend by the FIS.
Just don't say you'll cut fuel prices. That might help.
No, I'm sorry. Even taking that into account, sorry Mr. Shettigar, I'm interrupting. Even taking that into account, the prices are way high. No, I'm sorry. You can't mislead the viewers of NDTV
no,
like this.
I'm not
you cannot do that.
No, I'm not misleading. Sorry, I'm not.
The dollar price during UPA2. What was the dollar price?
I'm not misleading. I'm suggesting a solution. So keeping this in view, because there is a negative signal both from the FIS, because there may be further withdrawal because of the likely hike in the federal rate. There will be, because in the 2 more hikes are expected. They are bound to withdraw from the FIs, which will have the impact, both rate of exchange as well as this. So keeping
what do you see the political impact being? Because, you know,
politically, of course, any government, incumbent government, will have to pay the price, though technically the government has no role in deciding the price of the petroleum product.
How did the prices not go up during the Karnataka campaign? That was very mysterious.
No, that is unfair. That is putting the pressure on the PSUs. As long as you have got control on the PSU.
For 20 days there was no hike.
No,
and it mysteriously coincided with the Karnataka campaign.
I do agree that it is not fair. Any incumbent government will do that and all. But it is not fair, because that is why we suggest that you bring reforms. Go for the disinvestment of the oil PSUs or any PSU, whether it is a banking sector or the oil sector. Go for the disinvestment so that the government doesn't have the control. The majority share will be in the private sector. So unless you implement the reforms, wholesome reforms.
Yeah, but then you can't, if you're going to do that, then, you know, don't suspend the hike in prices, for 20 days because it's politically convenient, because there's an election.
That is exactly because of your control on the PSUs.
Yeah. So Gurcharan Das wants to make a point. Mr. Das, go ahead.
Well, I think I totally endorse what Mr. Shettigar is saying. I think there are certain principles let's accept. We are part of a global economy, and worldwide, one of the things we need in the long term is in foreign investment, which means investors. We need investment because we will be moving into another era where we'll be less dependent on oil, but we'll need investment for solar, for renewables, for electric cars, for many, many new technological things. And the world has to respect the fact that we treat our companies as a contract. We cannot just, like you said, for 18 days of the Karnataka election, behave in a different way, or the way we behaved for 30 years before. Now, I think the Indian government has won some respect in the world, and it's very, very important that we do not treat these PSUs as though they were part of the government. There has to be a distance, and also if we had respected our contracts, we would today have had a lot more people investing in gas, in exploration.
Well, I think that is an important point about PSUs. But the fact is that India in this neighborhood remains the one country where fuel prices are the highest today, and I think that for a lot of people it is inexplicable that such a high proportion of that money is because of taxes. I think people are asking today, where is that money going? How is that being accounted for? Isn't there any other way that the government can raise revenue? These are questions I think the government will have to deal with. It is a tricky political and economic question to deal with. I have to leave it at that tonight. Thank you to all of you for joining us.